Screams tore through the air as the alien thug smashed the human's face into the bar, purple blood spraying from his broken nose. Zarnik Station, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, sprawled across the asteroid belt. Its dim alleys crawled with the dregs of 100 worlds who came to trade in secrets, spice, and slaves. In the pulsing heart of the station squatted the Supernova Bar, where the deadliest mercs and pirates gathered to drink, gamble, and brawl. Shouts and jeers filled the smoky air as patrons crowded around a knot of humans surrounded by hulking Arcturians. The human crew had made a fatal mistake coming here, thinking their primitive weapons would keep them safe. Now they would pay the price in blood and pain. Their only hope was their leader, a grizzled ex-soldier named Reyes. Reyes locked eyes with the Arcturian boss, a cruel brute named Zephyr. The alien sneered, flexing razor-tipped claws. "Surrender your credits and gear, meat, before I peel the skin from your bones," Zephyr growled. Reyes had to act fast. If he failed, his crew was dead. But what could one ancient human weapon do against the most feared killers in the galaxy? The bar erupted into a clamor of shouts and jeers as Reyes and Zephyr faced off. The patrons formed a tight circle around them, jostling for a better view. Credits changed hands rapidly as bets were placed, the odds heavily favoring the Arcturian brute. Reyes' crew clustered behind him. Tanner cracked his knuckles, thick arms flexing. Jax bounced on his toes, a coiled spring ready to explode into violence. Rook stood impassive, his single eye glinting coldly in the bar's dim light. Zephyr sneered as he named his terms. 10 paces, turn and fire, first hit wins. His clawed hand caressed the sleek metal of his plasma pistol. The weapon hummed with deadly energy, its advanced targeting system guaranteeing lethal precision. Reyes simply nodded, a ghost of a smile on his weathered face. He drew his ancient revolver from its holster with a fluid motion. The blued steel gleamed dully under the neon lights. The two duelists turned their backs to each other. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the spectacle. Step by step, the opponents moved apart, the distance between them growing. At the 10th pace, they whirled to face each other in a blur of motion. Zephyr's pistol whined as it locked onto Reyes, the Arcturian's finger tightening on the trigger. A staccato burst of plasma bolts scorched the air, flashing towards Reyes at near light-speed velocity. The human was already moving, dropping into a combat roll. Superheated plasma sizzled over his head as he tumbled. Reyes came up firing, his aim steady. The revolver roared, a thunderous boom that shook the room. The heavy bullet blasted through Zephyr's shoulder in a spray of purple blood, the impact spinning the Arcturian like a top. Zephyr crashed to the floor in a clatter of chitin and metal. His plasma pistol skittered away across the grimy floor. Utter silence reigned for a single heartbeat. Then the room exploded into bedlam. Shock and disbelief warred on the faces of the watching crowd. Reyes rose to his feet, the acrid stench of gun smoke wreathing his head. He strode to his fallen foe, grinding a boot into Zephyr's heaving chest. The human leaned down until he was a handspan from the Arcturian's face. Reyes' whispered words were lost in the cacophony, but their impact was clear. Zephyr's eyes went wide with fear, and he nodded desperately. Reyes straightened, his gaze sweeping the stunned onlookers. "It's done," he said flatly. "We're square. Anyone touches me and mine, they answer to me." Reyes' crew fell in behind him as he shouldered his way to the bar. The crowd parted before him, a sea of uneasy faces and mutters. The whispers followed them through the room, awed and speculative. Who was this human that carried the weapons of ancient terror as if born to them? What other secrets did he hide behind that cold stare? Zarnik Station had just become a far more interesting place. Word of Reyes' shocking victory over Zephyr spread through Zarnik Station like wildfire. Smugglers gossiped in dark corners, gesturing excitedly. Mercs sharpened their blades, eyeing the humans with calculating gazes. Barkeeps fielded a flood of bets on who would challenge the Terran gunslinger next. One figure watched the buzz of activity with particular interest. Grix leaned back in his booth, sipping a steaming mug of Zorgon ale. The arms dealer had an ear to the station's rumor mill, and this development was too intriguing to ignore. He flipped open his comm unit and typed out a quick message. Reyes Grix, Booth 7, Supernova Bar. 1 hour, come alone. His finger hovered over the send button for a moment before he jabbed it decisively. Reyes glanced up from his whiskey as his comm chimed. He scanned the message, his brow furrowing. Tanner leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the screen. Grix, isn't he that slimy Zorgon gun runner? What's he want with you? Guess I'll find out, Reyes said, draining his glass and standing. Watch the ship, I'll be back in 2. The Supernova was quieter now, the gamblers and gawkers having moved on to fresher entertainment. Reyes picked his way through the detritus of smashed glasses and spilled drinks to Booth 7. Grix looked up as Reyes slid into the seat across from him. The Zorgon's features were sharp and angular, his mottled green skin glistening in the low light. Captain Reyes, he said, his voice a rasping hiss. Thank you for coming. You wanted to talk, so talk, Reyes said, his tone clipped. Grix leaned forward, his dark eyes glinting. That was quite a show you put on. Zephyr's not an easy mark. That little hand cannon of yours must pack a punch. Reyes' hand drifted towards his holster. It gets the job done. What's it to you? The Zorgon spread his hands. I'm something of a collector of rare and valuable weapons, and a piece like that, well, I'd be very interested in acquiring it. Name your price. Reyes shook his head. It's not for sale. This gun's been in my family for generations. I ain't parting with it. Grix's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Everything has a price, Captain, but perhaps we can make a different arrangement. I can offer you advanced tech, weapons that would make your little toy look like a child's pop gun. All I ask is a steady supply of human arms. Surely you have contacts back on Terra, in your military perhaps. Reyes' eyes narrowed. We look like arms dealers to you. We're just trying to get by out here, same as anyone. Not interested in getting mixed up in that kind of business. The Zorgon settled back, steepling his fingers. Pity, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. I can be a very generous friend to have, Captain. Think it over. Reyes stood abruptly. We're done here. He turned on his heel and strode out, his boots ringing on the metal deck. Back on the ship, Reyes filled his crew in on Grix's proposition. Tanner scowled, his heavy brows knitting together. I don't like it, boss. Grix is bad news. Selling weapons to a snake like that, it ain't right. Jax nodded. Could bring a lot of heat down on us too, don't need the attention. But Rook cocked his head thoughtfully, his cyber eye whirring as it focused. Might be worth considering, he said, his voice a dry rasp. We could use the credits, and better gear would give us an edge. It's a tough galaxy out there. Reyes sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not. A sudden pounding on the ship's airlock cut him off. Tanner moved to the monitor, cursing under his breath. It's Zephyr, he spat. Looks like he brought friends this time. At least a dozen hulking Arcturians clustered outside, wielding a nasty assortment of blades and blasters. Zephyr's voice crackled over the comm, laced with fury. Reyes, I know you're in there, you coward. Come out and face me, or we'll tear this scrap heap apart around you. Reyes checked his gun, his mind racing. They were badly outnumbered and outgunned. He needed time to think, to plan. His eyes fell on his comm unit, Grix's message still glowing on the screen. With a muttered oath, he snatched it up and typed out a response. Grix, need that favor now. He hit send, praying the Zorgon would come through. Precious seconds ticked by as Zephyr raged outside, his gang growing restless. Just as Reyes was about to order his crew to arm themselves for a desperate last stand, his comm chimed. Bay 94, hurry! Sending escort. Reyes sagged in relief, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Looks like they'd be hearing Grix out after all. Reyes and his crew huddled in the dimly lit cargo bay of Grix's ship, the hum of the engines a constant backdrop. Jax lay on the floor, his breath coming in shallow gasps as Tanner applied pressure to the plasma wound in his side. The stench of burnt flesh hung heavy in the air. Grix lounged in the doorway, His mottled face split in a predatory grin. "I must say, Captain, you exceeded my expectations. That artifact will fetch a pretty penny on the black market." Reyes glared at the Zorgan, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "We held up our end of the deal. Now get us off this station." Grix tutted, wagging a finger. "Not so fast. There's still the matter of payment. That little relic is a good start, but I'll be taking those antique shooters of yours as well." Tanner surged to his feet with a snarl. "Like hell you will." Reyes held up a hand, his gaze never leaving Grix. "These guns are all that's keeping you honest right now. We ain't handing them over." The Zorgan's eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand the position you're in, Reyes. I own you, and if you don't play nice—" He let the threat hang. A metallic click echoed through the hold as Rook chambered around in his revolver, the barrel trained on Grix. "Way I see it, we got ourselves a good old-fashioned standoff." Grix hissed in frustration, his fingers twitching towards his holster. The tense silence stretched, broken only by Jax's labored breathing. Suddenly the ship shuddered as an explosion rocked the hull. Alarms blared and the lights flickered. Grix stumbled, caught off guard. Reyes seized the moment, lunging forward and slamming the butt of his revolver into the Zorgan's temple. Grix crumpled, out cold. Reyes spun to face his crew. "Tanner, Rook, grab Jax, we need to move." They hauled their wounded comrade up, slinging his arms over their shoulders. Reyes led the way, revolver at the ready, as they raced through the ship's corridors. The airlock gaped open, the docking bay beyond a chaos of blaster fire and smoke. Zephyr and his Arcturians were locked in a vicious firefight with Grix's guards, plasma bolts crisscrossing the space in a deadly light show. Reyes cursed under his breath. They were caught between two enemies, with nowhere to run. He scanned the bay desperately, his eyes falling on a battered freighter in the far corner. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "There," he pointed. "We make for that ship. Rook, lay down covering fire. Tanner, you get Jax on board. I'll hold them off." Rook unslung his rifle, the weapon thrumming with power. He sighted down the barrel and squeezed the trigger, sending a hail of plasma into the fray. Zephyr's thugs scattered, buying precious seconds. Tanner half-dragged, half-carried Jax across the bay, the wounded man groaning with each step. Reyes brought up the rear, his revolver barking as he picked off Arcturians with precise shots. They reached the freighter's ramp, Rook racing ahead to the cockpit. The ship shuddered as its engines roared to life. Tanner hauled Jax aboard, Reyes diving after them just as a plasma bolt sizzled past his ear. The ramp slammed shut and the ship lurched into the air, Rook coaxing every ounce of speed from the protesting engines. Reyes sagged against the wall, his heart pounding. They'd made it, barely. A weak cough drew his attention. Jax was sprawled on the deck, his face ashen. Tanner knelt beside him, hands slick with blood as he tried to staunch the flow. Reyes crouched down, gripping his friend's hand. "Hang in there, Jax. We'll get you patched up." Jax shook his head, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "We both know I'm not walking away from this one, Cap." His eyes fluttered shut, his chest stilling. Tanner bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Reyes felt a yawning pit open in his gut, loss and guilt threatening to swallow him whole. He forced himself to stand, laying a hand on Tanner's shoulder. "We'll give him a proper send-off, but right now we need to keep moving. It's what he would want." Tanner nodded, rising unsteadily. They secured Jax's body as best they could, a solemn silence falling over the ship. In the cockpit, Rook plotted a course for deep space, his face grim. "Where to, Cap?" Reyes stared out at the stars, the weight of their future pressing down on him. They'd burned their bridges and lost a brother. The only path was forward, into the unknown. "Anywhere but here, Rook. Just get us clear of this mess." As the ship jumped to light speed, leaving Zarnek Station far behind, Reyes fingered the worn grip of his revolver. The galaxy had taken much from them, but it hadn't broken them. Not yet. The stolen ship drifted through the void, its hull still scarred from their desperate escape. Reyes sat hunched over the controls, his eyes gritty with exhaustion. Tanner paced the cramped confines of the cockpit, his boots ringing on the metal deck. Rook stood silent in the corner, his single eye fixed on the stars outside. A sudden ping from the comm panel shattered the heavy silence. Reyes leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he read the incoming message. It's a distress signal from a human colony on Nexus Prime. Tanner paused mid-stride. Nexus Prime? Out here in the ass end of space? What's a human colony doing so far from Earth? Reyes shrugged. Doesn't matter, they're in trouble. Says they're under attack by some unknown alien force. Rook shifted, the servos in his cyberarm whirring. We've got our own problems, Cap, we should keep moving. But Reyes was already plotting a course, his jaw set. They're our people, Rook. We don't turn our backs on our own. The ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere, the view screen filled with roiling clouds of ash. Reyes guided them down, the thrusters kicking up swirls of grey dust as they touched down on the outskirts of the colony. The settlement was in ruins, buildings reduced to blasted shells and bodies littering the streets. Survivors huddled in the shadows, their faces gaunt and haunted. A man stumbled forward as the crew disembarked, his clothes torn and stained with blood. Thank God you're here. We thought no one would come. Reyes gripped the man's shoulder. What happened here? The survivor shuddered. They came out of nowhere, these things like insects, but huge. They tore through our defenses like they were nothing. They're not here for us. They want the beryllium crystals, our main export. They mean to strip the planet bare. Tanner spat on the ground. Damn cricks, heard stories about them. Never thought they'd hit a human colony. Reyes checked the load on his revolver, the chambers full of fat .44 rounds. Well, they picked the wrong damn colony this time. For the next week, Reyes and his crew waged a guerrilla war against the Crix invaders. They struck from the shadows, picking off scouts and raiding parties with precise shots from their revolvers. The heavy rounds punched through the insectoid's chitin armor, like it was paper, splattering green ichor across the dusty ground. The Crick, used to the clean, quick kills of plasma weapons, were unprepared for the raw, brutal damage inflicted by the human guns. They fell back, regrouping, their tactics shifting to counter this new threat. But Reyes pressed the advantage, leading daring raids on the aliens' supply lines and communications hubs. The colonists rallied behind them, taking up arms and joining the fight. It was during one of these raids that disaster struck. Tanner, always the first into the fray, was cut off and surrounded. Reyes watched in horror as his friend was swarmed by the Crix, disappearing under a writhing mass of segmented limbs and snapping mandibles. By the time they fought their way to his position, Tanner was gone, a smear of blood the only sign of his fate. Reyes knelt in the dust, his fists clenched, a howl of rage and grief building in his throat. Rook laid a hand on his shoulder. We'll get him back, Cap. We'll make them pay. They tracked the Crix to their hive ship, a pulsing organic monstrosity orbiting the planet. With a handful of the boldest colonists, they infiltrated the vessel, fighting their way through the twisting, mucus-slick corridors. In the heart of the ship, they found Tanner, battered and bloody but alive. He grinned through cracked lips as Reyes cut him free. What took you so long? Together they planted a payload of mining explosives, enough to cripple the hive ship's systems. But as they made their escape, a Crix guard burst from the shadows, its plasma rifle spitting fire. Rook shoved Reyes aside, taking the brunt of the blast. He crumpled, his cyber eye flickering and going dark. Reyes caught him as he fell, cradling his friend as the life drained from him. With a final effort, Rook pressed his rifle into Reyes's hands. "Give 'em hell, Cap, give 'em hell for me!" Tears stinging his eyes, Reyes led the survivors back to the stolen ship. As they blasted free of the hive ship, the explosives detonated, ripping through the Crix vessel in a wave of fire and shrapnel. On the planet below, Reyes and Tanner helped the colonists bury their dead and rebuild their shattered lives. The story of their stand against the Crix spread like wildfire, whispers of the human warriors and their ancient weapons passing from ship to ship, station to station. And as Reyes bid farewell to Tanner, each setting out to find their own path in the galaxy, He knew that Rook's sacrifice and the legend they had forged together would live on. A beacon of hope in the darkness, a reminder that even the smallest spark of defiance could ignite the fires of resistance. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.